Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in this next episode of In the Nick of Time in about 13 minutes, so stay tuned. We're going to have Sanjay today, the CTO of Traceable.ai, talk about security APIs and also how to take two businesses to unicorns. So that's going to be very interesting. So stay tuned. If you want to share you're here with us today, put your name and company in the comment section below. Also, if you have a question for Sanjay, make sure you start with a Q so we know it's a question in the comment section. We'll get started in about 12 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes, so stay tuned. We're going to have a great discussion today with Sanjay, the CTO of Traceable.ai. Will be a great discussion also about security and APIs, but also how to scale a business from a two-member organization to unicorns. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned, and thanks again for joining us. If you want to share, you're here. Put your name and company so we can highlight you on the screen. And of course, if you have questions, make sure you start with a Q so we know it's a question in the comment section below. Thanks so much. We'll get started in about 9 minutes. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes in the next episode of In the Nick of Time with Sanjay, the CTO of Traceable.ai. Will be a great discussion on API security and also about how to scale two companies from a two-person entity to a unicorn. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's make sure if you have questions, you start in the comment section with a Q so we know it's a question. Also, if you want to share you here with us today, just put your name and company so we can highlight you on the screen as well. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Chalon. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. This is going to be so much fun today. We have a great guest, as always, with Sanjay, the CTO of Traceable.ai. It's going to be a great discussion on APIs and security, but also on how to take a startup and grow it to a unicorn and make it to exit. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Let's also take a step back today. If you've missed this, we are starting a defense group for investments. So a lot of you guys are reaching out to me asking for help when it comes to finding VCs that are interested in working with defense companies. And so if you're struggling, or if you want to have a great discussion with VCs and also early investors that are helping defense-related companies, make sure you join this new LinkedIn group. You're going to see we just created it today, and we have a lot of traction already, a lot of VCs and investors. Of course, we're not going to be spamming those guys, but the goal is to have open dialogue and make sure that we can learn and see what works and pretty much understand kind of the state of the market when it comes to organizations with dual use. Obviously, most people want to make sure you're not completely dependent on the defense market, which is usually pretty slow and painful. So that's something to keep in mind. And we have a lot of great discussion engagements. We're going to have some VCs on the show as well to talk about investments. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, if you want to join the group, of course, we're going to limit it to Five Eye nations. So, of course, if you're in the US, no problem. But only please invite people that are only Five Eye for now, to make sure we don't bring our Chinese and Russian folks on the group. That would not be great. So keep that in mind. If you missed that, please join the group, and we'll be able to scale this in the next couple of weeks. Also, as always, as a reminder, before we have our guest, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, do that on youtube.com/Nicolas Chalon. You're going to be able to see not only the show every Tuesday, but also the videos we're going to be pushing every week on tech. So this week, we published the video on GitOps, when you finally understand what GitOps is. So if you want to move at the pace of relevance and enable your teams to instantiate your applications with a push button deployment and understand the 5 principles of GitOps, make sure you check it out. We talk about teams with Harness, with Argo CD, and Weaveworks with Flux as well. That's the latest video. Before that, if you missed it, we have a great video on Service Mesh, and before that, Zero Trust. So really, we're checking all the key buzzwords out there, but it's really foundational technology that you need if you want to succeed in DevSecOps. So check that out. If you missed the video, we got some great feedback already from you guys. We also launched a new website. So if you want to track the videos, if you want to see the agenda and stuff like that, you can check out the website here. And finally, if you've not yet subscribed to the mailing list to get the emails about these videos and the show, we're not spamming people. It's really once or twice a week at best to announce the videos. Register so we're not dependent on LinkedIn to make all this visible to you. We are way too dependent right now. Out of the 37,000 subscribers on LinkedIn, we only have, I think, 5,000 on the mailing list. So that's a little bit scary. So if you want to subscribe, do that, please. And we're going to bring now in a second our guest, Sanjay. But first, I'm going to give you a quick background. If you don't know who Sanjay is a co-founder and CTO of Traceable.ai. But before that, he was also part of the founding team of AppDynamics, which was acquired by Cisco. And so he was a VP of engineering there as well. At AppDynamics, he was also responsible for the product teams and the application performance management and database monitoring products. Great set of tools that did very well with Cisco. He built those solutions to help the DevSecOps teams to move to this universe that we know pretty well of digital transformation with many Fortune 100 customers. So that's a massive undertaking. Of course, he has some fancy degrees and patents, but we don't care too much about that here. I'm sorry. So let's bring Sanjay on now. Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me on this one. And
Yeah, we're so excited to have
thanks
you.
for the introduction that way.
Well, you're quite the well-known figure in the DevSecOps world, and obviously, thanks to what you've achieved in the past, a lot of people pay attention, particularly, of course, to now what you're doing with Traceable. When we usually start the show, we always have kind of the same process, so people get to know you a little bit better, and no one better than yourself to give us a little bit of a rundown on your journey before we get into the real meat of the fun stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I guess I started my journey. I'm a little bit giving away my age and everything else, but that's okay. Started my journey very early on, probably at the age of maybe about 12, 10 to 12 with computers itself. I think that was when again, I grew up in India, did all my studies there in India. And there was a time when I was in a remote part of the country, call it a village, but now it's all become a little bit of a city. At that time, it was a village. And there we had our first experience with what computers would be like. This was a small library that was government funded, and somehow we had gotten access to I think it was IBM PCs. Again, I'm going back years now. At that time, and there was the exposure to graphics at that time, where I had the opportunity to go build a house and whatnot. This, again, a very young age, not engaged at that point. Nowadays, meaning kids are writing lots and lots of code at very early age. But at that time, that was a very interesting experience for us, a small group of kids trying to get to know something big, right? Something that was very unique in India. And as I said, in a remote part of the country, it's very hard to get. So that was an exciting time. That was my first exposure. And that's when I really got excited about computers itself, right? Then cut to my undergrad degree is where my dad at that time, and again, remember, we come as part of not well to do as families and everything else. My dad at that point spent about $1,000 or even more at that time, but it was a lot of money for us. But he wanted to make sure that I get access to a computer so that I can do lab work, I can learn more about it and everything else. So that was a P6, I think, a Pentium at that time. Probably, I don't remember, maybe. I don't remember how much of memory, but I remember that there was a gig of hard disk at that time. That was so literally we had to put all of those things together, as in the processor, and we had to literally build it up from the ground up with all the pieces that we got, and got Linux going on one end. At that time, it was very early, and then got Windows going on the other side, as in the boot up aspects of it. So it was a lot of fun at that time. Got to learn a whole bunch of it. And so that was my exposure and journey that way that we got through. And then got into, as an engineer, is where I started all of these things as a developer, core developer. Did some of that work in India, and then I landed in the US, as they say, the land of opportunity. Um, Obviously, it's been a great journey since then in the world of starting from writing like literally monolithic applications, which was there was an application which was consuming medical images and processing it, allowing it for rotation. So it was getting used as part of used with MRIs and everything else at Philips, as in healthcare. That's where I started my career, to going and building OLAP databases over a period of time, to obviously the whole journey of DevOps that started. Been there before even the word was coined that way, and so it's been a long journey that way through the many years of software development.
Yeah, and you've seen quite a few exits along the way. So we'll talk about that, on how interesting that kind of process is, to not only kind of give away your baby, right, but also then be kind of part of a universe of the acquirer, where you lose a little bit of control, and you have to find middle grounds. And God knows that sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes,
And often,
yes,
unfortunately, you see large organizations buying smaller companies because it seems like they can innovate better and faster, right? And God knows some big companies struggle with innovation, but then
yes,
they also buy them for the talent, and then the question is, are they able to retain both the culture and the talent, which unfortunately often is not happening, and then they have to buy another company to keep that from going on, right? So it's always fun. So
yes,
we'll
yes,
talk
yes.
about that, of course, in the show, because I think that's so important. But you talked about something in your opening about monolithic stacks, and funny enough, it's still the default really when it comes to building software in the Department of Defense, despite us trying to really educate teams on the benefit of modularity and flexibility and Lego blocks reuse. You've seen it, and we've done a great study, and we have a video on that on the show about SpaceX versus F-35, where SpaceX has 80% of their code of reuse across the 9 platforms, and you have F-35 with barely 4% shared with F-22s,
Yeah,
with 4,000 developers at F-35 and only 200 at SpaceX. So you can see
yeah,
also kind of the 50% defect rate of F-35, effectively meaning that we have 2,000 developers useless. So a lot of great lessons learned when it comes to being more nimble and
yeah.
flexible, and decoupling teams, and delivering at the pace of relevance. So tell us a little bit about how things are evolving between this monolithic world and microservices.
Absolutely. So it's funny because as you know, as you go through the journey in terms of all the various things that I've done in terms of software development itself, things have changed so much. Like I was talking about, I was in the healthcare business that we're writing software, and we literally used to write matrix manipulation services that way to actually go and rotate images and annotate some of the things and like go through the whole. We used to build all of those things as in code, right? C++
Mhm.
code at that time as in libraries that way, right? That means that now no one ever does it, right? Meaning all of those libraries are pretty much available for plugging in a lot of cases. And then we started to look at services that become available. I still remember writing a whole bunch of code to build SMS messaging, PBXs that way, and VoIP gateways that were getting built as gateways that could actually be sold to customers that way, right? Things have evolved a lot now. Now nobody goes and writes any of those things. You have Twilio as a service, which is an entirely API driven service that's available from the get go, right? So things have evolved to an extent where a lot of these have become services that are available to you to access. And this is from an external consumption perspective. And then of course there are lots and lots of libraries that are getting plugged in, and that means that they're going to introduce lots of vulnerabilities which we'll talk about along the way, which everybody knows. But nowadays the percentage of code that you actually write is pretty less. You are actually looking at reusing a lot of the software.
It's blue code, right? A lot of blue code.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. That means that a lot of the businesses can come online, because at the end of the day, a business is being built or an application is being built so that you're serving your customers with that, right? That means that if you can actually do the least amount of work to actually go build it and release the application or release the API online, the better the business is, right? And that goes to actually the crux of what we talk about as microservices and everything else, because the whole idea is that how can you actually improve the business on a continuous basis so that you're gaining more customers, you're gaining more market share, and of course you are bringing in the revenue based on that, right? This is where most businesses are built. And all of these businesses, if they have to continue to kind of evolve their functionality on a continuous basis that way, that means that then how do you know where these applications are getting deployed, how they're getting used? And that means that, like, as you look at all of these services that are coming online on a continuous basis, in a lot of cases you don't even have control over of how much of this code is getting deployed, right? Because businesses wanted this. Businesses wanted that you can fix the bugs for your customers much quicker. You can go and release new functionality on a hourly basis or a minute level basis, if not on a daily basis. That means that how do you enable the development teams to make it happen. And the way to do that was to start to separate the functionality itself and the concerns associated with it, so that the ownership can be driven across the functionality that's being delivered. And this is where the microservices start to come in, where you are given a set of functionality that you're supposed to be responsible for. Let's say, as an example, you are a set of reporting services that are getting used, or a set of inventory services in an e-commerce business that you're getting used. They're kind of separating a lot of these as individual functional units, so that they can go faster and faster and deliver that part of the functionality. But what happened was, because it was no longer a monolith that could be looked at holistically and said, okay, this is how the application is, I understand that application. Now what has happened is, how do you understand all of these various sets of applications to kind of come up with a way of holistically understanding these applications, is obviously a challenge now, right? And that is the evolution is happening. But at the same time, people are struggling with getting a full-on insight of how some of these broader things are coming together that way, right? One of the if you look at the older technologies again, right, it's there is a limited set of failure modes that they can have. That means that there used to be longer QA cycles, that you could test all of these things holistically, right? But in the microservices world now, things have changed significantly, where all of these things need to be continuously tested, continuously understood. That means that the contracts between these microservices need to be continuously understood, and the contracts between the APIs as part of these services need to be understood, right? So the evolution that way has been very, very interesting, because the broader idea is that all of these distributed microservices that are deployed, managing them and understanding them is very, very hard, right? Because again, one thing, one of the reasons why it is hard is because you don't necessarily know the dependencies in advance. Because if you are actually putting out a config service, as an example, and you want a whole bunch of services to be using it, you've published a contract on an API, and that's all you know. There could be multiple services who are actually consuming it, right? But also, on the same time, that means that if you are building an authorization service that is getting consumed by so many people, how do you ensure that the failure on the authorization service is not impacting so many of the other services that are depending on it, right? So how do you kind of think through all of these things is where we are, and there is a lot of work that's being done around that as part of the overall DevSecOps, as in a movement, if you want to call it that, but also the life cycle of it. But obviously, my interest is a lot more in securing these microservices and securing these APIs, and because of course, my background is also in how do we ensure that the failure of these microservices, in terms of the failure due to errors or due to performance, is something that obviously concerns me as an engineer. But the focus as Traceable as a company and myself is a lot more to do with security.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because like anything in life, there's everything that comes with a lot of great improvements, great also a lot of challenges, right? So
Yes.
you describe kind of the issues when it comes to training teams moving from monolithic to microservices. In fact, we're working on a video about the strangler pattern and how to understand domain-driven design and test-driven development, and really how to cut monolithic right. Because if you're tightly coupled, you create more issues than you're solving by cutting it wrong. And of course, you mentioned kind of the maturity of understanding the testing and the continuous delivery aspect. But then the need of having the global visibility on what's going on, and the complexity of the stack becomes even harder and harder to maintain. And you talk about the cyber issues. There's also like tremendous issues when it comes to scaling and orchestrating and making sure the stack is up and running and crashing and healthy. And that's where cattle versus pet, and we've done a video on that, and Kubernetes and containers have been kind of a massive enabler for teams struggling to do that. A lot of people kind of pushing back against microservices and modular architecture are often badly trained to understand how to solve these problems. You talked about kind of the API side of the the services and how they have contracts and agreement in place to make sure they're not breaking things, and with new releases, and making sure they're not disrupting the performance of the application and the security of the application. How do you see with kind of that adoption of APIs at scale now, really at a broader scale than ever before, both third-party APIs, but also APIs within the organization itself? How are those APIs changing?
Yeah. So if you look at first of all, every business today, if not all of them, definitely a majority of them are API driven businesses today, right? That means that anytime a new functionality needs to be released, they are driven through these APIs. That means that either new version of those APIs are coming, or new functionality is being introduced as part of the services that are powering those APIs, right? That means that they are the most important piece of a service today in most of the businesses. But the way they are changing is not just in terms of the code. The way they're also changing in the type of protocols that are getting introduced as part of that. Because before, in a lot of cases, what was there with SOAP as a protocol, which kind of started for a lot of these a lot of the services that got built. Then there was the RESTful services that came online. There is gRPC services which exist today as they're communicating, and then GraphQL services. There are tons of them that are getting built as part on top of GraphQL as a service.
And you had encryption on top, complexifying all that stuff.
Exactly, right? So that means that in a lot of cases, what happens is in most of the businesses, first, they don't even know where these APIs exist, right? Because they're growing mushrooms, as I say, right? Meaning it's there everywhere. So in a lot of cases, they don't even have an idea as to, one, where they are deployed, second, how they are getting used, and third, what is the data that's even flowing through all of these guys, right? So that means that for you to basically, like as they say in security, if you don't know where things are, then how are you even going to protect them that way, right? So the challenge there is not so much about there are APIs. The challenge is that they're growing, and also you don't have any idea of where they exist, right? And before, if you look at a lot of
Discovery,
cases,
right?
right, the discovery part of it, because without actually having a fundamental understanding of the API landscape within your organization itself, then you cannot protect it, right? But
Right.
when, in terms of the changing of the APIs itself, there are two aspects to that. One is when a new functionality gets introduced, typically a newer version of that API comes online. But what most of the times happens is, because these APIs, similar to microservices and the interaction between those microservices, APIs are the services that are getting exposed to the outside world. As an example, let's say just take Twilio as an example, which is entirely an API driven business. All of the APIs have different versions associated with them because there are older consumers of those APIs, and there could be APIs which are using different sets of parameters for those APIs. That means that you as a business still need to maintain a lot of these things, and also need to retire some of these things over a period of time, and also need to maintain documentation on this so that you know how they are getting actually used. Now, in the world of APIs, when these are continuously changing, how are you going to maintain them? How are you going to know who is using, what businesses are exposing it, what types of mobile applications, what types of B2B customers are actually using these APIs, right? And that is what the challenge is, because the APIs internally are changing because they're releasing new functionality or fixing issues and everything else, but there's a lack of understanding of how they're actually getting used and how that usage is impacting these changes that are happening, right? And that's what is key to kind of understand in terms of the usage itself, right? The bottom line there is that APIs of today are much more deeper, and they're much more wider deployed, and also they're very diverse because of the various set of use cases that are built on it, right? One last thing around that, when you talk about APIs, before, this is where and again, the perimeter before used to exist, where, like, okay, if you protect this edge layer of it, everything is great. But today, that's not the case. There is an entire class of East-West APIs because
Mm-hmm.
most of these microservices are deployed.
As
A
APIs
lot of
too.
them are deployed internally, and there is the edge set of it. And those internal APIs are actually carrying a lot of the functionality of what is getting exposed outside, but there's a lot of interaction that happens internally within the services as well. So how do you kind of start to track these East-West APIs? So that's another set of changes that are coming together, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's a
this is a big.
very fast changing and complex problem. I remember talking 3 years ago to Netflix when they had 700 microservices
Yep,
at Netflix, but they tracked the 20 services really needed to watch a movie. The rest could be cached or
correct,
effectively down with no impact to watching movies. But
correct.
they called the 20 the core, the critical, I guess,
Yep,
services that really you couldn't do business without those, and that's where they obviously had a very stringent chaos engineering to
yeah,
see how the system would behave, if some of these were going down, and how to quickly recover from these disasters. And
yes,
that's a massive lesson learned even in DoD when you look at the complexity of weapon systems.
yeah,
The ability we've seen so far in the first 3 years, moving to DevSecOps, we've seen an increase to the mean time to recovery
yep,
2,600 times faster,
yeah.
thanks to Kubernetes and containers. So that
With you.
alone could save lives.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Like again, going back years now, Netflix early on was one of the earlier customers for us at AppDynamics. And even if you Google AppDynamics and Netflix, you will get a chart which was a whole bunch of JVMs connected to each other. And as the business grew, they started with 10 JVMs, went to 1,000 to 10,000 JVMs, and kind of pushed the limits even of what AppDynamics as a company could do and a product could do, right? So it was so interesting to see the changes that happened within Netflix as they started to support more and more customers, and how connected it was. A single call, when people look at API calling, a single login call actually coming into at the edge makes so many different calls in the background, right?
Mm-hmm.
Starting with multiple authentication / authorization services, to audit services, to user info services. That way, there are
Mm-hmm.
tons of things that happen in the background, right? It's a single call at the front end, right? But now, if you
Right.
think of it, that means
The
that
flow,
any
right?
one change on any of these other APIs in the background could have an impact actually on the external API, right? And in a
Right.
lot of cases, like this one happened pretty recently with all the log4shell aspects of it. People were like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm just protecting my edge and I'm secure. Guess
Right.
what? The edge may not be doing much, may not even be a Java application, but there are tons of services in the background which are Java applications. They potentially could be serializing data, potentially exposing you to log4shell as a vulnerability, right? So who is going to kind of look at all of these things end to end, right? That's where
Mm-hmm.
APIs are not just, okay, I'm changing it at the edge, I have full control over it, I'm okay. Even that's not possible when you're talking larger and larger organizations like Netflix and everybody else today who's a technically rich organization that way, right?
Yeah, so I guess that kind of leads me to the next question, right? Which is, when you started to design the traceable
Yeah,
AI capability, clearly the first step, like you said, to protect something, you have to know they exist. So
yeah,
you start with the discovery stuff, and as you said, there's so many APIs, both internal east-west traffic, but also third-party APIs you may be using, and depending on
yeah.
particularly when you start consuming a lot of maybe too many SaaS services. I don't know, but what do you think are the challenges when you build that capability to really bring that kind of holistic API discovery at scale that works for many organizations, not just one startup in a vacuum?
Yep. So I think there is two parts to this, right? There are a lot of legacy services as well within organizations. Then
Mm-hmm.
there are modern services which are more CI/CD compliant, and then they're going through this, right? So the challenges happen in both of those. In the case of legacy services, all they know is there are gateways through which the data is flowing through, the APIs are being accessed. It could be Apigee, Kong, whatnot, as in a set of gateways, right? That means that you need to kind of understand those APIs fundamentally, right? Discovery, when you look at API discovery, there are a few aspects of it that you need to understand. One, you need to first of all know where these APIs exist, how they're being accessed. The second thing that you need to know, what is the configuration associated with these APIs? Are you being compliant with those? Are you making sure that you can do an audit to make sure that they're compliant that way to the best practices? The
Mm-hmm.
third aspect that you need to know is, in a lot of cases, there is no documentation even associated with these APIs. That means that you don't even have an idea as a security team. In a lot of cases, you don't know what type of data is flowing through them. Is it
Mm-hmm.
sensitive, not sensitive? Who is accessing all of that data, right? And then the next part of it that you don't know is, who are the users of these APIs? What are the types of users that are actually coming in? What types of
Mm-hmm.
roles do they have access to, right? A lot of these things is part of the basic discovery that in a lot of cases doesn't exist, right? So it's very important to kind of understand the APIs holistically by first discovering them, as in naming them, and also understanding what type of APIs they are. Are they, as I said, what type of protocol are they being used for? As I said, the second one is the config. The third one is the sensitive data as it's flowing through, understanding what type of data is kind of flowing through and categorizing them into. It could be like a healthcare organization where you're categorizing PII and PHI data, or it could be a PCI and PII data, going through those categorizations and understanding, right? Then understanding
And you're
basically.
dealing with the crypto, right? The payload could be encrypted too, so that's another
Exactly.
layer.
Exactly. So there are cases where the payloads are encrypted. So how do you tap into them such that you understand the basics about that API? So there is innovation that had to happen there as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right, because in a lot of cases, and then also there is the MTLS aspect of it, which is that means that
Right.
service to service itself, there is a lot of there is encryption that exists as part of that. So how do you discover those as an APIs, right? Recently, I heard you talking with the Tetrate guys about the service mesh
Mm-hmm.
and everything else, right? Great conversation. There are certain cases where they're trying to solve some of these things at a pure data level by
Right.
integrating into MartSec or whatnot, just as providing those WAF capabilities, right? But
Mm-hmm.
APIs need to go beyond that. It is
Beyond
not
that,
just
right?
about a data pattern. You need to understand how the data is getting accessed by the users and build a behavioral context around that, right? And these all things come in because if you have to go change the way these APIs are presented to the security teams to know the posture at the end of the day, you have to go through and understand these APIs holistically, right? And that's what the whole thought process was in going and building and saying, hey, where can we get all this data from? How do we now take all these data and make sure it ties it back into the agile releases that happens, because dev teams are continuously releasing? And how do you tie this as in a distributed fashion where the data can actually be flowing in from the public cloud, from the public access to the public API through the internal services? How is that connection and how is the data actually flowing? And also, what is the connectivity to third party services that you're accessing? Because the reality is that these APIs are not only exposing themselves in a lot of cases into B2B access as an APIs, but also these APIs are accessing third-party APIs. So how do you kind of discover and say which are the third-party APIs to discover, right? So from an API perspective, Nick, it's about understanding what the edge APIs are, what the internal APIs are, which are the B2B type of APIs that are getting accessed, and then also the third-party APIs that the services are accessing, which could be numerous that way, right? So we need to understand all of these things holistically.
And the best way to show this back to the teams is with a graph or something that's more visual for them to understand the kind of the flow and what service talks to what, and kind of the east west, but also, like you said, the north south traffic, and maybe looking at egress of data, what data could be sent to a third party log aggregation
Yep.
capability, maybe you're consuming some other service. So like visually, I think if you have to list the stuff, it'll be
Yeah.
pretty difficult to do this if you
Sure.
don't have something visual, right?
Sure, sure. So there are three aspects to the way I think most of our personas consume, and that's the way I think folks will consume. One is, yes, there is a visual way. There is a visual dashboard of some of these things to show the interactions and also to allow you to slice and dice, because you may want to say, hey, show me only the
Yeah,
APIs
zoom
that are
in or
exposed
zoom
to the
out,
internet.
right? Yep.
Yeah. So some form of a visual map of all of these things is one way of consuming the data, where you can slice and dice the flow, slice and dice, and understand the nature of these APIs itself, right? But the other key thing that a lot of people use is to look at the API documentation itself, which can be
Mm-hmm.
integrated as part of your CD that way. So you know that the documentation is continuously up to date. And that means that it can be downloaded as part of your GitHub repo, or you could download it from the UI, because at the end of the day, it's about understanding these APIs from a discovery perspective, but also making sure you have an understanding of the documentation. Because the third
Mm.
aspect of it there is, folks want reporting. Basically, they are not looking at this every single day. They just want to understand, hey, here is all my, like, infosec guys or product security guys or developers broadly that way. They want to know at the end of, first of all, being alerted on anything new that came online. It could be a new API, or you identified a shadow API, you identified something as any kind of rogue APIs that way. They want to be known of it through a report that can come either as an alert or as a report, right? And also it could be new sensitive data types that came online, which you thought it should not be part of this API. Because we've had I've talked to multiple customers where in a lot of cases they have APIs which are not supposed to be receiving certain data because they're being used by partner
Mm.
APIs, right? They're not
Right. They
supposed to
shouldn't
be,
see the stuff.
right? And like I'll give you an example. This recently happened with Twitter. All right, Twitter shared the phone numbers that way, which is
Mm.
PII information, based on their ads API and everything else, which they were not supposed to do that. But even Twitter didn't know that. They didn't have an
Right.
idea that, at least based on the external conversations, that they didn't have an idea that this was actually getting shared, right? And obviously they had to pay a huge fine for it. But now if you think about it, this is happening across the board at many customers. They're sharing information that they're not supposed to be sharing, right? That's not part of their contracts. So how do you kind of understand this fundamentally and discover these things where this data is being accessed by this API and this API is being accessed by these set of users, right? That is what is the reporting aspects of it, and the slice and dice aspects of it will come in, so that they can even alert saying that if this happens again, please alert me that this data should not be, or anything that's violating this data policy, go ahead and identify this as part of this API, right? So that's the way I'll look at it.
Yeah, I've seen also a use case where people would pass all the previous payload to the next API, and so then there would be like a massive amount of data flowing to the next API, which was of sometimes sensitive, and then that would compound the problem down the road. So that's always something
Exactly,
people don't think
exactly.
about. Yeah.
And that is the fundamental difference between what how you would think of consider just perimeter defense with the WAF
Mm-hmm.
or things like that. Because with APIs, most of the times the API data is actually being used across APIs in a
Right.
legitimate way. But the challenge is that the hackers use that exact same knowledge that your mobile applications or anything else use, because the
Right.
same API is exposing the same data
Hijack sessions and
to the
yeah,
hijackers as well, right? That means that they're able to kind of understand the whole flow of
the flow.
data
Yeah.
and take advantage of it, right? That means that you need to have the full-on context of, when you go discover, you need to have the full-on context of what the relationships are between the data, right? So yeah,
Mm.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so that brings me to kind of your model, right? That you coined the shift left, protect right
Yeah.
concept, which makes a lot of sense, right? In terms of how do you secure APIs. The shift left portion obviously is pushing and making sure cyber is baked in as part of the CI/CD process, and then the protect right on the runtime side. So tell us about that's why kind of I've been explaining to people for 5 years now, with the
Yeah.
difference for me between DevOps and DevSecOps. The Sec
Yeah.
for me is not just, hey, I'm going to do some static analysis on my code. It's really the runtime security piece that makes it so that your DevSecOps platform is part of your runtime production environment.
Correct. Like I think there are when you look at the overall approach to security has to be something. How do you take the knowledge across your SDLC to protect yourself better, right? That means that you should understand how your APIs are actually getting built and deployed. That's where the shift left aspect of it comes in, where you're kind of looking at all of the APIs to ensure the right kind of authentication and authorization mechanisms exist as part of the APIs, and you understand the configuration that's being built in as part of this APIs in your shift left, as in lower environments that way, so that you know the basics about your APIs. And then that is where all of the documentation can get built for your APIs. Now, the next part of it is that you need to protect against many of the zero-day attacks that happen in your runtime. There is no way of saying that I've identified everything in my pre-production environments, right? Because there are two reasons for that. One is the zero-day aspects of it. The second aspect of it is that not all of the right kind of tests, all of the scanning that you can do in your shift left environments will identify all of the attacks. The simple reason is that when you look at a production environment, right, there is tons of differences between the way the data is getting accessed and the way the applications are being used in your production environments compared to the way they're actually being used as part of your QA environments or as part of your unit tests that are getting built, right?
Yeah, there's so much you can emulate, right?
Exactly. That means that you need to have that protection right as a strategy. But at the same time, it is not just enough just to say, I'm going to protect everything on the right side, because there are a lot of things
Yeah, you need
that
both.
actually be cut out, right? Like, for example, if you look at the shift left, where it starts in the code level, as in static scanning, that happens, right? For example, Sneak has done an amazing job there in kind of making sure that a lot of the vulnerabilities can be identified in your open source libraries as part of your dev lifecycle itself, where they highlight a lot of these things. But that is not good enough. That's a very, very good start in understanding that these vulnerabilities exist in your open source code, that you have libraries that you have that you have integrated into. But at the same time, now you need to take it to the next level. How do they actually impact at runtime, right? That is where you need to actually integrate this into your CD cycles, so that you know how these vulnerabilities can be identified as part of the CD cycle. Then carry that forward into your production environments to understand, now that you have identified these vulnerabilities in your static scanning and your scanning as part of your CD, now you understand how do you manage the risk at runtime. Because then based on what's happening in shift left, you can now understand that the risk associated with these APIs, and you need to prioritize those APIs to protect, right? This is where it's very, very important that risk-based vulnerability management as part of APIs is very critical here, because it is not, again, developers and everybody else, like everything else, there's only a limited amount of time. That means that if
Right.
you carry around and say there are 500 or 1,000 vulnerabilities, they're only going to attack the things that are actually very highly prioritized, and they can. And also that impacts the business, right? So how can you understand all of these things on your left side of it, and protecting on the runtime side of it is what is very, very critical, right? The other portion of it, which I was talking about before, is the documentation that comes. That means that you need to now understand which APIs are getting deployed in your production, that you don't have documentation for that in your left. You have already thought that you have deprecated an API that's still getting used. How do you kind of know that, right? And then also, what is it that, for example, there may be some data that has been documented as part of your shift left process, and we think we have understood that and we have actually portrayed that. But in your production environment, there may be a parameter that's actually getting used that is not even there in the documentation, because developers introduced it for whatever reason, right? So how do you kind of do the conformance analysis across these environments that way, to understand where your overall security posture is, right? That's what is very, very critical.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you mentioned kind of the two-sided coin, right, between the left side on the CI/CD side and the runtime piece, right? That creates an additional layer of complexity, which is that these cyber products are now becoming targets, right, of malicious actors. You've seen it of course, with SolarWinds, right? Why would you not try to hack the cyber company that's providing services to thousands of customers,
Correct.
and then end up on the runtime production side, often with
Right.
elevated privileges, right, to get
Right.
more access to what's happening on runtime. And so that makes products like you guys and Snyk and others, dozens of runtime security stacks that we have both on the cloud provider side and just Kubernetes related CNCF projects, a prime target, right, of malicious actors as well.
Sure, it does. And the way to think about this is in a lot of cases, right? It is about more of that self-healing and self-understanding of what your application does and how it does, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
even like the way you look at whether it is us or anyone else that is in some cases part of a customer's environment and part of providing those services, that's where you have to be aware of the activity and the typical behavior of the application itself rather than just treating ourselves. That's where think about the zero trust overall, right? That is something that needs to exist. It is not just enough if we say, oh, like that's what happened with SolarWinds, right? Everything as part of that is kosher and we don't need to really look at anything. That's not possible, right? That means that we have
Mm-hmm.
to seriously consider all of the components that basically that are part of the organization, including the vendors that are there.
Anyway, it's interesting because Tim was asking the question about how SolarWinds kind of changed the cyber, but also how I guess the issue we've seen with SolarWinds kind of happened. I was in the government back then, and I had direct engagement with the CIO and CISO and CEO of SolarWinds many times. In fact, I was probably one of the top actors on the government side during this response. And I when I was listening to the briefs of those guys, it seemed to me that a lot of it had to do with pretty basic poor cyber hygiene, including not using MFA on their 365 email stuff, and that led to people getting access to emails, which then led to people using accounts to get into the CI/CD stuff and their build server, and then because they don't use any kind of moving target defense and they don't treat their CI/CD as cattle. They were able to retain access to the build server and then inject malicious code and so on, right? And I find sometimes the top cyber companies, or well, SolarWinds, they don't call themselves a cyber company, but
Sure.
whatever. I've met many other companies in cyber that have very poor cyber hygiene, right? It's kind of they're preaching others, but they're not leading the way to even use their own stuff. And I find cyber companies with hundreds of CVs in their containers, and I'm like, how do you pick your dependency? Or we don't have an SBOM process. We don't track that kind of stuff. I'm like, why are you a cyber company, right? So what have you put in place, in Traceable to kind of look at kind of the holistic cyber? What do you think about? What keeps you up at night when you think of dependencies of third-party open source, risk of potential malicious actor getting into open source bits? So what's really a scary thing that you think about?
Sure. First of all, let me say this, right. Like whether it is SolarWinds or anyone in the cyber tech industry that way, right? What I can tell you, because I've talked to many of these leaders over the many years, right? Their intentions always, including ours and everybody that way, is always to make sure that they're always protecting their customers, right? And ensuring that everything that they can do, they try to do it, because they're all trying to do good things, right? Nobody is trying to build a
Sure,
company just
it's
because they
not
want to make some
malicious.
money, right?
Sometimes it's incompetence though, but it's not malicious.
Happen, it's not malicious. I agree with you. So
Yeah.
I think the on our end, of course, we take this very, very seriously, and that we obviously have a lot of internal systems that obviously is very tough to go into here as a conversation.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is that in our case, there are two ways of we looking at it. One is there are customers where we do offer on-prem solutions itself, so that the customer owns the entire
Mm-hmm.
set of data that way, right? In a lot of cases that where we have obviously provide SaaS services, there a lot of the data that we actually receive from the customers is obfuscated. So it's not necessarily that we have access to any of the data, right, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of protection, because there are a lot of localized decisions that get made as part of this, as part of the overall platform.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, we definitely take it very, very seriously, and we have published externally as well in terms of what all we do and how we protect
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and we also share that with our customers as well, in terms of everything that we do. But
So
honestly, it all starts with
transparency is
this.
important, right?
Yeah, it all starts with the same set of fundamentals, right? is
Mm-hmm.
is basically, do you understand all of your applications and APIs that you're exposing, and you understand all the users, where they're coming from, how they're accessing it, right? Building those
Mm-hmm.
behavioral patterns. Like, as you said, we start with the shift left aspect of it, by not just basically the static scanning aspects of it, but running the right kind of tests in the pre-prod
Mm-hmm.
environments. And we go through all the same things that we are kind of talking about here, right? Because at the end of the day, we are exposing those APIs as well on our end, right?
Yeah. It's it's interesting to see kind of groups like Lapsus, right, target now the source code side instead of the runtime side of companies. They're trying to steal both the source code, and of course, once they have the source code, now they can look for 0 days, right, and get into
Right.
the next level. And I think we're
Right.
going to see a drastic number of 0 days in the next few months on all
Absolutely.
the source code, both on the Samsung Galaxy stuff, the Microsoft stuff, the Okta stuff. I think there's going to be
Yeah.
much more than
Yeah.
people are thinking about.
Yeah.
What do you do when you think of your crown jewel, right? Your software, your code base. Of course, people should be using MFA for their Git repo. They should
Yep.
probably think about signing commits so they track who does what, and the kind of the process of committing code. Of course, best practice is also to have multiple set of eyes to merge code and approve big changes and things like that. What do you recommend people when you think of the source code side of the house? What should they think about?
I think first of all of the things that you talked about, and obviously all the things that you do to make sure, one of the biggest problems that any company can have is how much of their secrets are being shared, in terms of, I'm talking about auth tokens and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I I would definitely keep an eye on some of those things, right? But actually, let me look at this a little bit differently, right? In the modern world of APIs, that way, this has become a little bit even more scary, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily need to have access to the code. If you have an understanding of how these APIs are working, because APIs are that code pretty much in a lot of
Right.
cases, right? That means that if you kind of know what APIs exist, and how they are exposing the data, and how the data is interacting between the APIs, and what's the typical sequence that they get called in, as an example,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can do a lot of damage that way, just with that information, right? You don't
Right.
necessarily need to have access to the source code in a lot of
Right.
cases,
Right. You
right?
can't just guess what's happening.
Yeah, so that is where I would go to protect in a lot of cases, right? And other than that, I think there is a list of things that's been published in terms of everything to do, from your of course, all the things, all the GitHub actions and GitHub activities that you can actually track as part of the
Mm-hmm.
organization. In terms of the code itself, is very good. All of the secrets that are published as part of that, make sure they
Mm-hmm.
are not published. There is zero reasons to publish them, right? And
Right.
also, in a lot of cases, the open source aspect, I saw this from Google, who's going to be working very closely to identify all of the open source vulnerabilities, to
Yeah.
kind of start to say
They're
where
gonna
this
do a
guy
repo
is
of
at
trusted
risk.
libraries. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. I think we should all be collaborating on that and supporting that, right? And so, yeah, so there are lots of these things that can be done, and I would highly encourage anybody who's looking at APIs to start, again, ignoring traceable or not, right? Fundamentally, first, try to understand where these APIs fit in and how they're getting exposed, because that's, nowadays, you don't really need to get access to the source, as long as you get access to that API, right?
Right.
And how it behaves. And everybody has access to that API, because you're really trying to expose that to
Make it
your
available.
customers
Right.
anyways, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So I guess we did talk a little bit about CI/CD and DevSecOps, but when you look specifically to Traceable,
Yeah.
where exactly in the CI/CD process do you tie back into that process, and where do you see the biggest bang for the buck? Because there's so many phases and gates in the CI/CD pipeline. Many are, to feel good about it, right? But
Yeah.
maybe you don't see always. Like, for example, you look at static code analysis. I can tell you, when you look at malicious code in nature, not bad code, but malicious in nature, most scanners are not going to find malicious code if it's good code, right? So
Yeah.
it's going to pass the scans, and something like doing a time bomb or exfiltrating data.
Yeah.
Very often, scanners are not able to recognize that kind of stuff. But
Correct.
when you look at Traceable specifically and the API security stack you're bringing to the table here,
Correct.
what phase do you get involved in the CI?
Yeah. So we are, so the way we look at it is we offer end-to-end API security, right? Introducing security as early as you can in the STLC is key when you look at
Right.
anything, as in making your application secure, right? We get involved at the dev and at the staging and at the production level. We are not scanning, we are not doing static scanning to
Yeah,
identify
you're not doing
vulnerabilities
scanning
that
of
are
code.
inside the libraries, right? That's
Yeah,
not where we are. We are post that. That means that we are
post
part
that.
of your CD cycle, so that we know that this is what is getting deployed into dev. This is the type of data that is flowing through, and these are the APIs that exist as part of your dev as it flows from dev to staging to prod, right?
Are you when people? I know there was a question on Twitter. I can put on the screen because Twitter doesn't have the option. But how is that enabling you to see potential injection into the what if so I guess because you don't scan the code, are you able to find if people are if APIs are compromised in terms of SQL or XSS injections, or
Correct.
you just see the calls to the API on the runtime side?
So we are looking at it on. So there are two ways that we actually think about this. One is from a shift left perspective. If you have a QA environment, that means that there are APIs that are running through that QA environment. That is data that is running through that QA environment. We'll be able to identify all of the vulnerabilities through that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second aspect of it is that if you have an API documentation as in an open API spec that way, we'll be able to identify vulnerabilities through that as well from a shift left perspective. But the key for us is the runtime protection aspect of it. The reason is that means that we are seeing certain things in your production environments which may not be in your QA environments.
Mm-hmm.
That knowledge then is going to come back to tell you that here is the type of data that we saw in your production environment. Here is the type of APIs that we saw, which you did not have in your QA environments. That means that cycle is what is very, very critical, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not enough. I don't think we can survive going forward from a product security and DevSecOps perspective if we treat these as isolated environments. They are not. Similar to how DevOps and the whole CI/CD cycle works, that there is always this continuous feedback loop because people keep
Right.
deploying into production and reverting things back, right? That's the feedback loop that happens all the time, right? Why not in security? Because
Yeah.
that's key, right? In security, that has never happened. Let's like we treat these as like I ran my scan in my dev environment, so I'm good. Yes,
Right.
sure, that part of it is good, but what if production is getting used differently? How do you
Yeah. How do
protect
you
them,
feed
but
back
also
that
bring
data
them
back
in?
to the dev teams? Yeah.
That feedback is what is very, very important, and that's the so that means that we are there across the pipeline, right? But starting from the CD aspects of it, and not as part of your as part of your static
Well, you
tests.
can you kind of answer my next question pretty
Yeah.
much, because that was the what can we learn from production environment and bring it back to the to the dev life cycle. But if
Yeah.
you, I guess, anything you had to add to that piece, like
Yeah.
how do people usually do it, and do you see like SRE teams and development teams having to do a better job at collaborating?
Yes. So I think, see, the idea is that from a QA environment or pre-production environments, that way, there is always that idea that they want to mimic as much of the real user behavior as possible. But the reality is the production environment is where a lot of the
Malicious actors
traffic
are going to be
exists,
too, right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the hacker activity exists as well, right? That means that now you will need to bring all of these into your pre-production environment. And one of the key things there is that helps you prioritize as well. Because as I was saying before, at the end of the day, there's only a limited time and a limited set of things that any developer or a product security engineer can actually look at, right? That means that now you can actually prioritize some of the fixes to be done based on that context, that shared context that way. And the shared context, as well as the exploitability factor of those APIs itself, by understanding which of them are being accessed externally or only internally. What's the data of sensitivity that exists? What is the level of sensitivity that exists on that data? What are the types of authentication that are getting exposed in various sets of environments, right? And also you're trying to understand what is the volume of traffic that is seen and who are the users and what types of roles that they're accessing. Because in the QA environment or on the dev part of it, may not have all of those things. You may not even be, in a lot of cases, you may be exposing an API that's the most used API, but the testing of that is weak that way, right? So how do you kind of bring that knowledge, right? And that's where I think the whole aspect of taking the data and the threats that actually exist on endpoint in the production environments and starting to bring that to do the right kind of testing from a security perspective in the pre-production environments is very, very key. That means that you can actually prioritize the fixes that need to happen, but also that you can do, as we were talking earlier, a risk-based vulnerability management associated with this, but also risk-based protection as well. So you know which are the most riskiest that way as in APIs.
Interesting. And did you see kind of that feedback loop requiring humans in the middle, or ideally kind of the tools will be able to feed back to the development side without having humans in production having to share things with the development teams?
Yeah, no, I think no, if humans need to be involved to share the information between environments, then it's going to be as similar to the issue that we run into where the documentation is not up to date, right? So the whole thought process
Bottlenecks
there
and
is that,
frogs, yeah.
yeah, it's a tool going to be able to consume data from various environments, and how can that be shared with each other? But there are, of course, you need to take into consideration where there are privacy issues in terms of what data can be shared between pre-production and production environments, right? That's where all of the smarts need to come about. What is the type of data that can be shared and how it can be shared? It is not like there are two environments who are exactly sharing all of the information. It's about the relevant information shared in the right format with the left as well as the right. Right, that's the
Yeah,
key.
we have the component issue in DoD where the development environment is sometimes unclassified and
Yep,
the production environment is classified, and you usually cannot, or it's very difficult to bring any kind of data back down.
exactly.
We kind of negotiated to bring maybe some stuff like error codes and bugs
Exactly.
and issues, but
Exactly.
without any kind of classified data.
But you bring up a good point, right? There is still a human in the loop to approve certain things that can
Hmm.
exist. Not that we have it today, but that's something definitely that can exist as part of the tooling
Hmm.
to
Yeah,
make this in such a way that the human in the loop is the one who's going through an approval process, which kind of
right,
helps with the audit aspect of it as well.
right. So we got a lot of questions from the public, but I had to ask you that question as a founder myself and having sold a few companies as well. How
Yeah.
did you manage to take
Yeah.
two member startups to large distributed teams, and what were kind of the challenges you faced?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to speak generically on this based on like many of the startups that I talked to today as well,
Hmm.
and of course the past experiences that way and everything else, right? So the way at least I've always looked at it is in three parts, right? Which is people, product, and process, right?
Hmm.
As in the three P's. That's the way I've always looked at most of these
Like
things.
Marcus Lemonis, he has the same thing. Marcus is the same.
And I think for me the people aspect of it is what is core to the success, right? And why I say that is the first 10 people that you bring into the organization are the key to the organization. So you
Mm,
generally what I have at least done is the first 10 people, because they form the core and they form the culture of the organization.
right.
Because one of the things activities that I've always liked to follow is on day 0 and day 1 is you
Hmm.
form what are the key values that you want to stick to, right? Like some of the values that I've always had is in terms of the internal team, is the collaboration and the mutual respect aspect of it, right? Those two are very key when it comes to building a very strong team, right? And to begin with, like first of all, taking Traceable itself, we were born during the pandemic, right? And that
Yeah.
means that even though
That changed a lot of things, huh?
it changed a lot of things, right? That means that it became even more critical of the type of people that you can bring in. It is not necessary that you should have worked with all of these people in the past, but you need to understand, are there a shared set of values that you can bring associated with these people, right? That's where I would start first. So because for me, the first 10 people are the people who are going to bring in the next 100. The next 100 are the people who are going to bring in the next 1,000, right? That's the way it continues as you go build the organization. So I would build more of the way, at least I've done here, is that build more of a localized team to begin with, because as a local startup, it's very, very hard to say I'm going to have a distributed team from the get-go, because you need to have certain core fundamentals built out as part of this, as in to go build a larger organization in the long run, right? So from a people perspective, you as a founder and early engineer, that way you will have to spend all the time in hiring. If honestly, at the end of the day, if you walk away saying, I talked to 50 people today and I was able to convince 5 of them to come talk to me further about the company and get to talk to the engineers, you actually have won, because it takes a lot of effort to bring in people. It doesn't
It's
matter what
volume.
you've
Yeah,
done
you
in the
need
past.
some volume.
Yeah, because like and that pipeline, you need to like I'll tell you this, right? The pitch that you give for the first time, honestly, before even talking to investors or anybody, I would talk to people, right? Like, try to hire them first. If you can convince them and hire them, then you can convince an investor to invest in you, right? That's the way I
Right.
honestly look at it, because the type of questions that come from them, especially in a market where there is lots of opportunity.
Particularly in this market in IT, it might be different in other businesses, but yeah, for
Yes,
this, no doubt. Yeah.
yes. And so I think building the team, that initial team, is very, very key. The other part of it, in terms of the values that we were talking about, right? I base the philosophy always on a very simple one, which is anybody who comes in, whether they are an engineer or any team member or an advisor or anybody that way, the concept is that it's your company you're building. It's not mine, it's not a founder's company or something like that. It's your company, because at the end of the day, you are investing your time into making it a success. And the reason why it's your company is important is that means that there is a level of transparency and empowerment that exists as part of it, because it means that you know what's the right thing to do, right? You exactly have an idea about, as long as the core vision has been agreed on and the mission is right for us, right? You just go, because you are invested in it, right? And the way to do that as an empowerment, I think, that goes to building stronger teams that way, is we have engineers, for example, and I've always had that, is whether you have 0 years or 25 years of experience, you have that broader impact. Like, we have fresh interns coming in who are shipping products, who are shipping actually
Yeah.
code that are being used by customers,
Pushing the
right?
production the first day, I think, whatever company was doing. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
this is, I think that forms the core, right, in building that initial culture that way, in terms of bringing the right people in, right? But always try to keep the bar high that way, right? Don't try to I know the market can be tough and everything else, right? But you will build your
You
own
don't
metric.
want to settle for the. I know sometimes, unfortunately, you take the best of the least bad, right? It doesn't mean it's a good, right? So
Correct. You have to have that bar very high, and also you will start to figure out your own metrics over a period of time, right? As I said, it's a funnel. Hiring is a funnel, and people is where everything starts. That's why I'm talking about the people a lot, because that's where everything starts. And make sure that the first set of people are good. But at the same time, I'll tell you this: you will make mistakes. I can guarantee you that you will make mistakes.
what's a good ratio? I guess. When do you know you're messing up too much? Like on
Uh,
the first 10, how many stick?
I think for the first 10, there are there are two different reasons why things don't work out, right? One, you decide that the talent that you thought existed for whatever reason is not there, or the commitment or the passion that you thought they're going to bring to the table is not there, either because it was a wrong fit, or maybe because you sold them wrongly, or you kind of gave them the information that maybe it was not valid. That's where I always say that don't try to sell. Make sure that you are fully open with them about everything, because otherwise you're going to suffer, because
If
they're
you
going to come for
oversell,
the
it's
first
not
three
good.
months then they're going to leave.
Yeah.
The second
Yeah.
reason why sometimes what happens is, when there have been even my own experience now, where there has been like two or three of them who came in and they left to start their own ventures, which is a good thing for them, because they felt that they learned certain things for the first 6 months, a year, and they felt that, okay, now they can take this themselves, they can do something else better, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that for them, right? But those are the two
Sometimes I have a
reasons.
hard awakening though, but yeah, that's good. That's good.
But honestly,
That's
I
okay.
think we
That's
should
okay.
be open to that, right?
Yeah,
Because
for sure, for sure.
my belief is pretty simple, right? As long as the time they spent here, they were improved as an individual when they left,
Yeah,
I think we have done our job, right? That's all we
yeah.
can ask for, right? So I think from a people perspective, those are some of the things that
So
are
how many
my
out of 10?
experience.
You didn't even remember. Like out of 10,
Yeah,
what's fair versus
I
problematic?
I think if you succeed in keeping 70-75% of that for the first year, I think you've
Yeah.
succeeded, right?
Mm.
And I think I will be very honest. Every company differs, obviously, right? The reason why it is the case in a lot of cases is that if you have done 75, in a lot of cases you can get up to 80 to 90, as long
Yeah.
as you're engaging with the right people, right?
Hmm.
And that's where take the time to bring that core team together,
What
because
are
they
the,
will
the,
make a
the, the
significant
hardest roles when you look at the first 10? What are the
absolutely.
hardest role to hire for? Is it in the sales side? For me, the tech was always easy to hire, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sales was so painful.
Yeah, no, I think my belief is that the you are the first sales guy, right?
Yeah,
You will
for
have
sure.
to do
If you're
all of
not a
the
sales guy, you
selling.
shouldn't be an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you will do a lot of the selling to begin with, and by the time the first sales guy comes in, it'll take a bit of a time that way, right? And this is where
So
again,
you don't think you have a sales guy in the first 10?
the way I would work, and this is where, meaning, I don't want to plug someone on your show that way as an example, but I'll give you, there are VCs, right? And again,
Yeah.
people can guess who my favorite VC is, because they invested in Traceable that way. But if you ignore that, like I'll say, Unusual VC was one of our first investors, right? What they have done, and many others are doing it, right? What they have done is they have created they call it a gap program, as an example, a get ahead program, I think it is. The concept is that you don't necessarily need to build everything of a non product function within the organization to begin with. Go
Hmm.
bring some of these very rich experienced people who have built
Right.
sales for MongoDB, built sales for other organizations. Go bring them in more to work with you for the first 3 months to 6 months, to go build some of these processes in place, right?
Right.
Yes, in some cases you may like them so much that you try to convince them to come and work for you. That's a different story,
Right.
right? But at the same time, my belief is that you are the sales guy first and you go and sell it, but try
Hmm.
to take help
I
from
see.
someone that is already an investor in you, who can actually take you to the next level, right? That's my suggestion would be for anything non-product to begin with,
So
right?
how early do you get your first run of funding?
So of course, again, the market has changed and things have changed as well now, but
Is it actually ready? Do you feel already the recession kind of happening?
I would not go, and I think that's way above my paycheck to kind of
Yeah.
say whether a recession is happening or
But
not.
you
But what
see,
I can,
well, I mean, well, at least you feel something.
yes, but at the same time, the funding environment has changed. The funding environment has
Right.
changed to back to the fundamentals that way, right? As in building a solid company for the long run. You can no
Hmm.
longer go unless you have done certain things in the past where you've been successful. You can no longer go with just a simple deck and say, yeah, I want $10 million to go build a company that's going to take me whatever, a couple of years to go build, right? People
Hmm.
are expecting that there are certain metrics that you go through, even in
Certain
starting with.
realistic numbers.
It's more of when I say back to the fundamentals, right? It's more of thinking about revenue as the key number that you can go raise
Mhm.
money with, right? And when I say like pre-seed and seed, of course, is
Pre-sales.
pre-seed and seed, of course, is always the case where there are obviously very early in the game, right? And that is when you go and make sure that the idea is solid. And I would recommend people to go raise at that point, unless they can bootstrap everything themselves and they are like eating out of your noodles, like we used to do in the university, the ramen noodles kind of thing. Unless you want to do that
The
and just
garage.
go
Yeah.
only two people and make things happen, right? Which is definitely possible. I would say the seed is definitely something that they should raise if they believe in the solid idea and if they believe that they can accelerate the development aspect of it, right? Beyond that, I think there is now, yeah, everybody talks about it around, hey, you need to have a much longer runway because there is all of the things going on. But ignoring all that, the fundamentals are still the same. Go after the revenue aspects of it. Go after the customer validation aspects of it, right?
Break
This is
even.
where
Break even is a foreign concept to companies nowadays. It's like I've never raised money, and for me it was always making breaking even, and I was funding the stuff, and
correct.
it's just interesting how people completely forgot that hey, you can actually make money and break even, and
Absolutely.
actually even have profits.
Absolutely. But I think it's all about how you want to scale the company, to what
Yeah,
level you want to
sure.
take it, right? That's when you raise the
Yeah,
money, when you know that
yeah.
there is
Next
something of
level.
a chance of scaling it, right, to the next
Yeah.
level, right? And
Do you think some of the rounds you've seen in the last 3 years, you've seen a little bit of disconnect between kind of the valuation that companies were getting and the actual delivery of value?
yeah, I mean, there has been. I think, see, in my head at least, valuation is just it's just part of a milestone, right? It's something to be, of course, to be proud of, because rarely companies even succeed getting to an A
That's
round,
that. Yeah.
right? If someone gets to a B or a C or a D or an
You
F,
just got
whatever
the
they
B
are,
at what was the valuation over 500 million, right? So you did pretty well.
a little bit less than that, but yes, we did decently well there. But as I said, it's not about the valuation. The simple reason there is that it is a milestone, right? Because valuations um, uh, only matter as long as you're hitting the right revenue numbers, you're making your customers successful, building the right
Hmm.
product, right? That's what it's going to be about, right? You build the right product, satisfy your customers, and get the revenue that is needed. Automatically the valuations will flow, right? Yes, they may not be what to say, like crazy valuations that people were expecting maybe even 6 months, 1 year ago, but definitely the valuations are going to be there for the right companies. I don't think that's going to change. That fundamental
Yeah,
hasn't changed, right?
that's
But yeah, there
interesting.
has been crazier things that have happened in the last
Yeah, there are a lot of crazy things in this world, so that's fair, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
But
Yes.
I guess the question also when it comes to revenue, right?
Yeah.
Um, as you know, I'm on the board of several companies. In fact, full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of Traceable. But I have people on the show regardless. There's no payment for the show, so
Yeah.
I try to be very open to anybody. And in fact, we even have competitors and people of all breed coming to the show. So, but one of the companies I'm helping, I'm not going to say the name because we have a disagreement on one thing, and I love for you to settle the case, right? That person is kind of pushing the fact that because the product is not perfect, right? It's pretty early, right? Let's say there are a year and a half of development, which is pretty strong. That I think it's good enough, but he thinks it's not good enough, and maybe it's just a matter of like aiming for perfection forever, which is also scary, right? And
Sure.
he thinks until he gets to that point, right? And the point is almost like this weird movable point, but
Sure.
he's saying until he gets to that point, he doesn't want to charge, the first engagement. So all the proof of all the POCs that he has with prospects and customers, I guess. They are free customers, which for me is a non-starter. I hate all of it. I never actually had a free customer. I give heavy discounts maybe, but I feel like you need to have the pain, right, to be a good first early adapter adopter, and if you don't feel any pain on the financial side, I would argue you're not a customer anyway. So what do you think about, at what point do you start charging for the product when you start building a startup, or do you just start right away? Like I always started right away, but what do you think?
I agree with you. I would, like, again, ignoring the discounts aspects of it. That's definitely something which is very different, right?
Sure.
You need to start charging for it if the customer is deriving value from it. That's the key, right? If the customer is deriving value for it, then honestly, you should charge for it from day one. Because one of the difficulties that everybody has is that, how do you build out the whole pricing and packaging aspects of it that way, right? That confusion will always exist. And believe me, it doesn't matter how many times you've done, or how many things you have gone through, you will always have, because that's the most difficult part. But at the same time, you would start selling from day one. You would have them pay from day one. The reason is that
it's something, right? It has to be something.
It has to be something, because otherwise, how are you going to determine the value is continuously being derived? Because that is the only metric. Because the moment there's a huge difference.
The rest is the wind. Yeah.
Here's the thing: ask the customer to sign off on a $200 a check for you, $1,000, depending on what the value is, right?
Sure.
That's when the customer will go, that's interesting. Is it giving me value, right? Till then, you haven't.
That scares me when they don't even have the discussion too, right? It's like, no, it's like, well, I can just play with the stuff because it's free,
Yeah. I mean, because see, one thing I'll tell you, right? Meaning, every one of our customers has built our product today. Every one of them, right? They have been, they have been very much part of the entire product building, but they've all paid for it. The reason why they paid for it is because they believe in the value that the product is going to give them, right? If there is no value that's offering them, you may give them tons of support, you may give them the best product, but they don't care, right? That means that they are not going to pay for it. The moment they pay for it, it means that they're deriving value. Otherwise, they won't pay. Just because Nick is a good guy, they're not going to pay you that, right?
It's just, so I'm gonna cut the video, and I'm gonna send him your answer. So maybe I'm not the only one trying to convince him. And it's also interesting because it's been a year and a half, so it's not it's a lot of development. I mean, it's solid stuff, so I'm like, if I got excited enough to become an advisor, you probably got enough to have people pay for the stuff. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And the other thing, people always have this thing, which some of the younger companies that I've talked to.
He's actually old, by the way, but that's a different problem.
Some of the younger companies ask me that way is, oh, do I go public with this, or do I not go public?
Oh, yes. They think of the exit before even building a product, huh?
No. What I mean public is as in as in go live, as all the stealth versus stealth.
Yeah. That's a new thing. I never thought of stealth before too. I never.
I have only two simple metrics there, right? You are in stealth only because if you feel that you can do all the fundraising in the background, you can do all the hiring in the background, you don't need anything, then stay in stealth as long as you're getting the customers, right?
But it's dangerous, right, to stay too long, right? Because that's like this moving target of when are you gonna, open the door, just like that person, right? And he had many exits before. That's interesting to me because it's not his first company. Like I say, he's an older gentleman, so he has a great background, great expertise, but it's like he's trying to become, to get to a perfect state. And I'm like, your perfect state is always changing. So when is that time, right? It's always interesting. You learn more and you get better, and
it is
tough.
My perfect state is that if someone is willing to pay for the first deployment that they did, that's my perfect state.
You don't really have a product until somebody's willing to pay for it. I would argue, you don't have a product if no one is willing to pay for something. It's just not a thing.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
So at least we agree on that one. I knew you would. That's why I kind of cheated.
We do. Now I'll just kind of continue on from a process perspective, right? Like, I think building the distributed teams that way, the way I've approached that always is to make sure we are honestly truly a distributed team. We have, first of all, we are a remote first company, so everybody is pretty much remote. We have people
Remote.
all over the US in various places. We have someone working in Canada. We have a whole product team out of India. The way we started to do that was first ensuring the first engineer that comes on is somebody that was from the network, somebody that we knew, who we had worked with before. Then the leader that we brought on was somebody that we have worked for a long time. That means that there is
Mm-hmm.
zero trust building that is required, right? That's,
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving an ideal scenario, but I'll get to
Yeah,
if
it's
it is,
tough to
that's
get
not
there for the
necessarily
first
the case
time.
for
Yeah,
everybody, right?
most people wanted that one. Yeah.
Yeah, but so that is one scenario. If it can happen, that's perfect, right? But the second way of doing this is making sure that you bring the leader first, but the leader has to be somebody who is right for the stage. That means that
Mm.
somebody who can go, and because distributed teams, wherever you build it in Israel, you build it in Europe, you build it in India, it doesn't matter. Bring a local leader who is hands on. Don't
Mm.
bring a local leader who is just a manager, because
Mm.
the culture that you build across the board for the first, I would say, 50 team members, as in engineers as team members, we can talk broadly as a company as well. Broadly as a company as well, it applies it, is that they
Mm-hmm.
should be really hands-on, whether they're in sales or in marketing or in product, doesn't matter. Really hands-on, because the first 30 to 40 guys that come in, right, they are the ones who are actually making a lot of
Do
the
the work.
core decisions that way, right? They're building the core company that way, right? That
Mm-hmm.
means that if the more hands-on they are, the better, right? And so distributed teams as well, I would go bring in a leader first rather than just going an individual engineer to begin with, because you can get, right, unless you are going after just a remote first, where, hey, I want to go hire wherever the talent is, right? Then of course you're managing from here and you're going through. But the moment you start to form distributed teams where there are localized teams, right, there are two things to keep in mind. There are localized cultures, and
Mm-hmm.
there is local understanding that needs to be there. That's where a local
Mm-hmm.
leader is very, very important, right? And the local
Mm.
leader, if he's hands-on, that means that the culture continues of building hands-on leaders across the company, right?
Mm.
And I think that's the key thing there, in terms of that's one thing. Distributed teams, uh, everything comes down to, that's what the whole remote work has taught us now, right? For example, GitLab has been doing it for ages, and all of a sudden people are like, hey, the pandemic is hitting, what do you do now, right? So everybody
Yeah.
started to understand how hard it is to work remotely. Not that we have got it perfect or others have mastered it. It's a very tough one, and every company is different. That culture probably needs to be built as part of that company. But there are a couple of things that I can suggest. There is, make sure that you document the heck out of every single thing. Every single thing that
Mm.
you do needs to be documented, right? There is no substitute for that, because otherwise the communication breaks down, and not everybody has the right kind of,
Mistakes. Yeah.
right. There are a lot of mistakes that can happen because of that, right? Other than that, see if you can bring together people on a regular basis, whether first of all
Together.
localized in a lot of cases, but definitely bring them together in some ways. Not, again, in the pandemic we
Yeah,
could
you can't
never
succeed
do.
if they don't meet, right? There's no such thing as a successful company if they never even met one time ever. I mean,
Correct,
it's impossible. No
correct,
one
correct.
can care, right?
Correct. So I would definitely look to kind of build that, right? But at the core, the like we were talking about the values, right? The core principles need to be agreed on early on, right? One of the things on our end, as an example, there are no people managers that way, right? We
Mm.
decided to bring in mostly technical managers, people who are
Mm.
mostly just focused on technical aspects of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's processes around code quality, and how code reviews are pretty critical as part of the organization. And day one investment is on the CI/CD aspects of it, right?
Mm.
For example, we are a huge harness user internally, because that was on day one itself. We recognized that, hey, we need that to be inbuilt. That means that no service can just get deployed into dev, staging, or production without flowing through all of the right set of tests associated with it, right? So it means that you
Mm-hmm.
go through all of DevSecOps practices kind of from day one that way, right? And those are all things that kind of need to be set up from day one, because it gets harder as the company starts to
It's like
grow.
that. It's like that down the road. It's just, and it's
E-
harder to do it. And people
Exactly.
think they're moving faster by not doing it, but it's just gonna, compound the problem down the road. So yeah.
Yep. So back to, again, just the process and the hiring part of it. There again is that, make sure you're keeping at least a couple of years of scale in mind as you start, right? Sometimes I feel like startups, it's going to be very hard. Dude, I'm just trying to survive, make sure I can get through this
Hmm.
next 2 years. Yes, but it doesn't, like with everything else, right? Vision is
What's a
free.
good runway now with, I mean, clearly the market is what it is, but what would you say is a good runway now? 18
my
months?
my opinion is my opinion is about 2.5 years. 2.5 years,
Oh yeah.
if you can actually do it, I think that'll be
Yeah.
ideal.
Yeah.
2 years is okay, but I think 2.5 would
So
be
even
really
more than
ideal,
me. Okay. Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Because
The more the better anyway.
the more the better right now
Particularly
at
in
the
this
stage.
market. I think it's gonna particularly right now. I think maybe 2 years ago that would be a different story, but I think that's
Yes,
that's definitely much safer. Yeah.
yes.
So you just closed a B round.
Yes, we
I assume you're hiring. And
yes,
if
we are
so,
hiring.
what kind of people are you looking for? We have a lot of people that could be interested.
Sure. We are looking for anyone who is, I would consider an expert in DevSecOps, right? People who
Mm-hmm.
have spent the time in it, leaders who have actually spent the time and who understand how critical it is for an organization to have a very good CISO, to have a very good general DevSecOps leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I'm very interested in looking.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that we are looking for is someone who is an expert in AI and machine learning, who kind of try to see that, hey, these guys are thinking about APIs in a fundamentally different way. I want to be part of that. To
Mm-hmm.
kind of build and enhance a lot of the behavioral
On the
understanding of
behavioral
the
side of the
strategy,
house, yeah.
right?
Yep.
So I would love to talk to anyone who's interested in that, right? Even if they're not looking, and if they think that it's a technology conversation and having fun with it, I would love to
Mm-hmm.
chat, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we are looking for all smart engineers, right? Meaning developers
Developers.
across the
What
board.
languages? What languages should they know?
Yeah, mainly C++, Java, Golang. Uh,
Go.
we're truly polyglot this thing that way,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously we are microservices driven internally,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so yeah, and of course a heavy
And I
knowledge
assume they
on.
need to understand the kind of Kubernetes and all the
Yes,
universal like
it is,
containers. And,
because I tell you, a lot of our customers are on the journey, right? Not necessarily everybody. There are born in the cloud companies who are mostly
mm-hmm.
Kubernetes and Docker based, but there are larger enterprises who are still transitioning from data centers to the cloud in some cases, and to legacy deployments to Kubernetes and Docker based deployments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I obviously that's something today in the DevSecOps world. The knowledge of that, I think, is pretty critical, right?
Yeah. And there's always something interesting to me, right? I'm always obviously with the background we have in DoD, we're looking at kind of the competition between nations, right? And we're looking at obviously China and Russia and North Korea and all that good stuff. That's pretty common sense. At
Yeah.
the same time, I've had so many very successful Indians, right, join the show. I mean, you're one of many. Honestly, I feel like every C-level exec I meet nowadays is from India.
Yeah.
The previous guest on the show also was the CISO Prakash, the CISO of CloudBees, right? So all these guys are pretty exceptional. What would you say makes India such a breeding ground of innovators and tech guys that end up kind of controlling most of the US companies in IT? What's going on there?
First, one thing I would like to say is that US is great at recognizing the people, right? I
Yeah.
think that again, Nick,
We're not as
obviously.
racist as what people think. Yeah, that's true.
Right. I mean, again, I think it could be obviously everything could be different. It took me
Sure.
20 years to get a green card that way, and Jyoti was my
That sucks.
co-founder.
I had
Yeah,
to
it
go
took him
through
20 years
a
as well, right? So
process too.
it's that's the reality. But at the same time,
But
I
we did
think
it legally. We did it legally, right?
we did it legally, and also being US is obviously very great at recognizing the talent, right? That's
Yeah.
the most amazing thing. But from an India perspective, I think the focus is always on education. The focus has been on education, right? Ever
Very early,
since
right?
you're a
Very
kid,
early.
right? There are only two directions. Either you become a doctor or you become an engineer or you are a waste. That's the way we
A
all
failure.
grew up, right? Things have changed now. Now you can be a stand-up comedian, which
Yeah.
so it's pretty amazing now to see that shift that's happened in India, right? But so the direction was
Maybe
always
yeah.
that how do you educate the kids much better, and that has always been the bedrock. And of course there's a lot of
So do you think
competition.
the schools are better? What is it, really? If you go down to, is it just the culture or is it the schools
In my
or both?
opinion, it is a combination of that. I don't think we can just say the schools are better, right? Schools here are
Hmm.
great, they're amazing,
Yeah.
right? I think it is a lot of it is that culture to kind of enforce that you are going to go study, otherwise you'll not be able to do anything in
But it's
life,
a
right?
culture. But do you say that the public schools are good also in India
Yes,
compared to, because here public schools are not that
absolutely.
great depending on where you go, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah,
The
interesting.
schooling is great, no doubt about it. And again, a lot of the influences from here and
Is it
various
expensive
places.
like here too? Because
No,
I was
they're
shocked. Moving from France, the schools is all free in France, and moving here, I was like, "Holy cow! You're gonna pay
no.
12,000 a year for a kid? You know,
I,
it's just insane."
I tell you, I did my entire education. Probably about $1,000 is what I spent,
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
that's a big difference.
my brother was 5 years older than me. He completed all his education in maybe $200, right? So yeah, but it went up 5x in 5 years, but yeah, $1,000
That's
is what I
okay.
had spent.
Yeah,
So
that's like a rounding error of 1 year of a college degree here, right? So yeah.
exactly.
What do you think about the degrees? Do you think when you look at the talent you're hiring, do you even care? Do you look at degrees or you look
No,
at experience?
so it depends on the area. Like for example, in the area of data science,
AI maybe. Yeah.
data science, I think it's beneficial to have some form of a research degree there, right?
Yeah.
Whether even in masters as in research or in the this thing as well, right? And I think and so that way, I other than that, honestly, degrees don't matter. I think it is.
I have a high school diploma. That counts, right? For something, I guess. That's what I got.
It definitely does, but I think the idea is that, like in all honesty, right? We have a whole bunch of fresh undergrads who have come in, right? I'm so amazed at the next generation of engineers and entrepreneurs that are
Hmm.
actually coming on, because they are so much, Nick. Again, you're right. You and I are not that old, but at the same time, these younger guys that I actually get to meet every single day, whether they are founders of other companies or engineers as part of Traceable, they are all so amazing. They're also amazingly talented, passionate. They started writing code much earlier in their careers that way, and they are all not hesitant shipping code. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing, right? By the first time when I started to ship code that way as in a bigger company, it took me almost a year before I shipped any good code, right?
Hmm.
But these guys are all amazing. Of course, they're empowered to do it, but at the same time, they're also not afraid to go and write good stuff and actually ship it out, right? So yeah, so it's a degree doesn't matter. It's more of
Yeah.
the passion that you
I had a good discussion at SpaceX with an engineer that came from Lockheed, and he spent
bring.
28 years at Lockheed, and he told me software in 28 years never made it to space, but within 3 weeks at SpaceX, his software made it to space, and that was like a
Exactly.
pretty good advertising for SpaceX right there.
Exactly. And I think back to schooling, right? I think the schooling, probably the main thing that needs to happen is it needs to evolve with the times. That's the main thing, right? As long as we are kind of going and keeping that industry connection when it comes to
Yeah,
schooling, that's all that is required. I think
sure.
schooling, in my opinion at least, schooling here is really good. I think it just needs to get to that next level in terms
But do
of
you
keeping
find
up
like
with their pace.
the kids coming out of college, you know, from what I've seen at least, companies struggle even to put them to work because what they learn is often obsolete, and they have to kind of reinvent and kind of spend a year. I see Google having these 1 year, engagements to update. So is that really that good if we teaching people stuff that's already obsolete by the time they come out of school and they pay $500,000 for it?
And that is the challenge. And that's the challenge, and also depends on what kind of degrees they're getting and everything else. And I agree with you, right? So
data science is probably different. I agree with data science.
Yeah.
But that might change in 10 years because I try to partner with schools, right, to help them with DevSecOps curriculums.
Yeah.
Most schools refuse to update curriculums more than every 3 to 5 years, and I said that's not going to fly for DevSecOps, so I refuse to get engaged.
Correct.
That tells you like they're fine charging you $200,000 per year, but updating the curriculum, that's too much work.
Yes, but I think that's where the internships actually help, right? In a lot of cases, people need to get into that whole internship cycle, get them hands-on, get them to learn everything, right?
And so you see companies like Google and all these guys were creating their own kind of learning experience and doing kind of this model of like a split between school and in the company. That's a pretty good model, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what needs to be encouraged more. I think gone are the days where you had a curriculum and you stuck to it for the first 5 years, 4 years, whatever it is. I think gone are those days. I don't think that's going to work in the future, right?
Yeah. So we have 3 questions that we have left before we let you go. I know you're busy. So, all right. So Tom was asking, as someone who has built and sold a company or two, what was your biggest success and what was your biggest failure?
Yeah, so I think the biggest success, I assume the conversation is more
on the business stuff. Yeah, I mean, I guess your kids could be one or whatever.
Yeah.
Forget about the
kids. They honestly are. So as part of as part of the one of the key success metrics always is the revenue part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I think myself and the entire team, like for example, if you look at AppDynamics as a company, where Jyoti Bansal was the founder of AppDynamics, one of the biggest successes that I and the entire team walked away with, how many customers even today that we meet have a conversation and say, we use that product and you guys actually worked with us to actually deploy the product and get it to scale, get it to discover real issues in our production environment, right? The number of customers that talk to us about that is still overwhelming, right? So I consider that as one of the biggest successes that way.
So not the sale, but the customer adoption.
Customer adoption, right? That's what is very, very important. Even today, everything as part of Traceable is about how many customers are getting deployed in production, how many are using it every single day, right? That's where our customer obsession comes from, right? Biggest failure. I think as one of the biggest failures that way that I still as part of the whole journey, I'm sure if we talk to a lot of the AppDynamics folks that way will tell you that is Cisco acquired it just 3 days before going public. And I think it would have been nice to take it through that and build a much longer term company. So collectively, I feel that
selling too early.
What?
Selling too early?
Not exactly selling too early, but I think again it so happened whatever as part of the whole process. But at the same time, I think probably that's one thing that I would consider that we could have done differently, right? But I think the success there on the other side of it is that we saw how APIs were changing the world. Coming back to it, and again, you'll always see me kind of think in that direction because that's what life is today for me. But regardless,
that's real,
seeing that there was so much that we could have done with APIs and everything else, and that we are now continuing to do that way, we're kind of we saw that early on. So that's another success that I really think is pretty critical for us.
Cool. All right, next question. William was asking, as you're planning out your different APIs, how do you determine the language and technology that is the best fit for microservice?
Yeah.
That's
again, it's the
case by case,
right tool for the right job, right?
So, but do you give unlimited access to all languages in your team, or you say no, you have to stick to C++, Go, Java, or you say, hey, use the best tool for the job?
No, I think when it comes to languages, we typically have, of course, there is the UI side of it, which can be a little bit different, but mostly
Right.
we are speaking to Golang and Java, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what this is where that goes back to the founding team that you bring in. They're very critical. The team that you bring is what is typically going to be the language of choice, right?
Right.
Because that initial, otherwise you will spend a lot of time ramping up people on a whole bunch of things, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
waste that. That means that the people, the skills they bring in is typically what you choose, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the language and technology, in our case, it's basically Golang, Java, and C++ is what we mostly have, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of microservices and everything else. But I would say, like many out there, and we also are heavy users of open source technologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way from open telemetry to Kafka to everything else that we use. So I think it is in a lot of cases depends on what you're trying to build. But if I were to kind of say start everything from scratch, I would definitely look at Golang as a language of
Mm-hmm.
choice for all microservices that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of beating from people who are
No.
who
No,
are.
I think that's pretty good. So, how would you evaluate the risk of using an open source API compared to an API that is vendor locked in and with no source code available?
Yeah, actually, this is a very excellent question. I'll talk about the no source code available. I'm not going to
Black
name.
box, right?
Yeah, it's a black box because there was there was a company, one of our customers who were using a reporting service that was written in Java, and their idea was that, oh, this is an application that we picked up and it just runs. We don't know how it works. We have just built reporting on top of it, and it's sitting somewhere. It is running, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
they did not realize was that that was actually log4shell vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and that means that pretty much their entire environment could have been taken over, right? So they didn't have an idea because it was sitting behind an API, and they were just
Mm-hmm.
using it, right? So in a lot of cases, that can be tricky when it's a black box, right? So I think so my recommendation there is to always understand the APIs that you're using, especially as they are hosted internally. If they are a
Mm-hmm.
service that is offering it, in a lot of cases, the risk from an API perspective is mostly data aspect of it and the data privacy aspects of it, right? That's what the risk there is, right? But in the case of the open source API, where you have the code and everything else, the biggest aspect there is where is that code coming from, who all are
Mm-hmm.
part of
The
it, and
provenance, the
how is that
contributors.
exactly, how is it getting distributed, how are you integrating that as part of your pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it in whatever reason it is integrated the wrong way, that's when
Mm-hmm.
there is a bit of an issue, right? And I
Yeah.
think that integration is very key. And then also the other aspect of it is that the usage of that API, how clear are you about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's what is not helpful is if that API gets used in multiple different ways, are you tracking those the right way? Who all are using it? Not just in terms of at a code level, but at a runtime level. How are they getting used? As long as you're tracking those, then I think you should be okay.
Very good. Well, we were lucky to have you today. As always, what I do is I leave the last meaningful words to you, and then after that, I'm going to tell people about the next show. But we'll give you the next few minutes to just give us your last thoughts. Over to you.
Absolutely. So I think for me, DevSecOps as a movement is core to the success going forward, and APIs are the key to the success of every business because every businesses are API driven now. So for you to fundamentally know about your APIs, you need to discover them the right way, you need to protect them the right way, and before that, you need to understand how the risk of these APIs what the risk of these APIs are in your lower environment. That's what will help you to kind of understand the overall risk posture, right? And that's where check out Traceable. And obviously, I'm happy to chat with anybody. Connect me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat about anything and everything as we discussed. all the way from APIs, of course, to startups and everything else. I'm learning.
Well, we're lucky to have you today. This was a very fun conversation, both on the cyber side, but also, like you said, on the entrepreneurial side. A lot of people want to give it a shot. A lot of people talk about it, but never take the jump. So they should give it a shot or stop talking about it.
Scratch
Right?
your itch.
Either you do it, but either you stop talking about it or you do it, right? But it's not for everybody. But if you want to do it, go for it, right? Now, back to the schedule. Unfortunately, next week I'm going to be in Texas to give a keynote in San Antonio. So for people in San Antonio, if you want to join us at the Vitech Innovate 2022, I'll be the keynote Tuesday 7th the morning. So I won't be able to do the show for the first time in 8 months. That's okay, because we will see you on the 14th of June, the week after, with Chris Hughes, who is well known in the DoD, the CISO and co-founder of Acquia. So Chris will be on, and we'll have a very interesting conversation about his journey, both in the department and then outside of it, and what he's been focusing on. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, stay safe. And again, Sanjay, thanks for being here with us. And everybody, have fun and stay safe. Bye-bye.